Welcome. Today I'm gonna be going over the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. For some context, this is a horror/crime remake that takes inspiration from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1, 2, and 3 along with 2 other films in the franchise. A quick spoiler warning, but other than that, sit back and enjoy. The film starts by showing us some archive footage of a police search on the Hewitt house, where we see the police officers overviewing the house taking notes on what they find. They slowly make their way into the basement, where we see them note things such as human blood hair inside of the walls and some fingernail scratch marks as well. We then transition to August 1973, where we meet the cast of the film, 5 young adults: Aaron, Kemper, Morgan, Andy, and Pepper. Right now they're on a road trip to a Lynyrd Skynyrd concert after coming back from Mexico. But while driving through Travis County, Texas, they see a woman on the side of the road who seems to be walking mindlessly. Worried for the girls get out of the car to make sure she's okay. And seeing how she doesn't look in the best mental space, they convince her to let them help her. The girl then joins the group, taking a seat in the back of the van. She then explains that she just wants to go home and says they're all dead. "I won't go back there." They ask her where she's talking about, but before saying anything, she pulls a pistol out from beneath her dress, aims it directly into her mouth, shooting and killing herself in the back of the van. Now with the hitchhiker dead in the back seat, they decide to delay their drive to the concert and instead contact the closest police. They make their way up to a rural county store where they talk to a clerk and get told they can either wait 2 hours or they're gonna have to drive to the mill themselves in order to meet the sheriff. They get frustrated over the matter, but they're not waiting that long. They instead drive over to the mill themselves, where instead of finding the sheriff, they find a little boy named Jedediah. Jedediah seems to live or hang out here, as there are decorations most likely belonging to him or his family. Jedediah talks to the group a little more, and they assure him they're not there to hurt him. They're just looking for sheriff. Jedediah then tells them the sheriff is drinking at home. He then lets them know where sheriff's house is, so that they can go and talk to him themselves, as that's gonna be their quickest option to meet him, which is exactly what Aaron and Kemper then decide to do, leaving the other 3 at the mill with Jedediah. Aaron and Kemper make their way to a large plantation house, where they meet the owner of the house. He's an old man named Monty Hewitt, an amputee with both his legs gone. After talking for a bit, he only allows Aaron into his house so that she can use his telephone to call for help. After finishing her call though, Monty then does something cheeky. He asks Aaron for help and uses the opportunity to fondle her without her noticing. Yeah, he's a creep. At this point, Kemper is still waiting outside and decides to go inside to look for Aaron. Kemper makes his way through the house trying to find Aaron, where he finds himself in one of the rooms of the house. We see a black and white cartoon playing on the TV shortly before Kemper is struck with a sledgehammer to the back by Leatherface. Leatherface then drags his body through a large steel door to the basement of the house. Aaron then leaves the house, noticing that Kemper's missing, but just assumes he went back to meet with the rest. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hoyt finally arrives at the mill and meets the group that was left with Jedediah. Sheriff Hoyt is a foul-mouthed and mean-spirited man, but does help dispose of the hitchhiker's body by wrapping her in cellophane and putting her in his trunk. Sheriff Hoyt then leaves, and Aaron, now arriving, finds out that Kemper is still missing from the house. This is when they all decide to go back to Monty's house to find Kemper, where they stumble upon some abandoned cars on their way. They find some photos of random people, but besides that, they make their way back to the house without any problems. But that changes once they finally arrive. Monty is sitting directly outside the house, so to distract him, Aaron goes and talks to Monty, while Andy searches for Kemper inside of the house, as they have a heavy suspicion that Monty had something to do with Kemper's sudden disappearance. Their plan doesn't last very long though, as while exploring the house, Andy drops a refrigerator directly on the floor, alerting both Aaron and Monty that something is happening inside of the house. Hearing the noise, Aaron runs to make sure Andy is okay, which directly reveals to Monty what's really going on, and as a result, he calls upon Leatherface to deal with Andy. After seeing Leatherface, Aaron escapes from the house and heads towards the woods, leaving Andy to deal with Leatherface alone. Andy avoids Leatherface pretty well, but Leatherface ends up catching up to him eventually and cuts Andy's left leg off. Leatherface then does the same thing he did to Kemper. Leatherface then carries him on top of his back to the basement, where if you pay attention, you can actually see Kemper leave the same marks we saw at the beginning of the movie. I thought that was pretty cool. Here in the basement, we see Leatherface hang Andy on a meat hooking hanging over a piano, where he rubs salt on Andy's stump of a leg before wrapping it in butcher paper and tying it with human hair. Talk about gruesome. Aaron now makes her way back to the mill and explains what happened to the group. She then tries starting the van so that she can finally leave, only there's one thing in the way. Sheriff Hoyt has shown up again, and now seeing Aaron's strange behavior delays them from leaving. He decides to search the car, where he finds marijuana. He then orders Aaron, Morgan, and Pepper to get out of the van, checks their IDs, and tells Morgan to once again explain the situation involving the hitchhiker to him. Only this time he wants him to explain everything to the smallest detail, as he is suspicious of his story, as he thinks that Morgan was the person that killed the hitchhiker. Sheriff hands him the gun, and as Morgan is explaining the story, Sheriff Hoyt keeps correcting him on the facts, saying things like he isn't sitting in the exact spot or that he isn't displaying her actions correctly. He tells Morgan to place the gun into his mouth the same exact way that the hitchhiker did, and after doing so, Sheriff Hoyt then says that's weird. I ain't never seen a gun shoot without someone pulling the trigger. Morgan, already terrified and being irritated by Sheriff, decides to instead point the gun directly at Sheriff Hoyt's head. Being provoked and pressured by the sheriff, he decides to pull the trigger, only to realize that Sheriff Hoyt had handed him an unloaded gun the whole time. Sheriff Hoyt then handcuffs Morgan and begins taking him to the Hewitt house, leaving the girls in the van alone where they are attacked by Leatherface. Only this time, Leatherface is wearing the face of Kemper. Pepper runs, but is cut in half by Leatherface's chainsaw, while Erin decides to start running into the woods, where Leatherface can be seen following closely behind her. The film then cuts to a drunk Sheriff Hoyt, continuing to taunt Morgan over his well-being, and for no reason, smashes a liquor bottle in Morgan's face, causing his mouth to bleed from his front teeth falling out. Hoyt then pulls out his own set of front false teeth and mentions how now they have something in common. Hoyt's now arriving back at the house, drags Morgan out of his car, into the house, and to the basement. Meanwhile, Erin manages to escape from Leatherface and hides in a nearby trailer with two women who offer her tea and try to soothe her. The morbidly obese middle-aged woman is only referred to as the tea lady, and the younger woman is named Henrietta, who is presumably her daughter. Both act very strange, but after telling Erin that they don't have a phone for her to call for help, a telephone in the trailer rings, and Henrietta picks it up and tells someone on the other end she's here. Erin confronts her about it, saying, "I thought you didn't have a phone." Erin then discovers that they kidnapped a child when she sees that the baby with them, as the photos they had previously found at the cars had a photo of this child and girl who committed suicide together. But before Erin can leave, she finds out that the tea she was offered was drugged and passes out on the floor. After waking up, she is now at the Hewitt house surrounded by the entire family: Leatherface, his mother Luda May, Sheriff Hoyt, Monty, and even the little boy Jedediah. Luda, Leatherface's mother, then explains to Erin that the reason for her son's actions was that her son was tormented by teenagers during his upbringing while working at the closed-down slaughterhouse, that she felt nobody cared for her family besides themselves. Erin is then taken to the basement of the house, where she finds Indy hanging in the same spot that we last saw him. She tries to help him off of the meat hook, but when he sees he will land on the piano keys and alert Leatherface, he begs her to kill him instead. Erin is very hesitant to do so and tries telling him that they can figure something out, but that doesn't change his mind, and eventually she ends up listening to him, grabbing a weapon she finds in the basement and stabbing him multiple times until he is left dead. She then finds Morgan, still handcuffed, and helps him. Jedediah then appears out of nowhere to help the last two, as he doesn't agree with what his family is doing. Leatherface, however, hears things happening in the basement and decides to go down and check. When he finds out what is happening, he begins chasing the two, as Jedediah leads them out of the house. Here, Jedediah rejects Erin's plea to come with them and instead distracts Leatherface long enough for them to escape. Erin and Morgan, now outside the house, find an abandoned house in the woods and barricade themselves inside. Leatherface finds them, however, and breaks in finding Erin, but Morgan attacks Leatherface, causing him to drop his chainsaw. Morgan then grabs Leatherface and attempts to wrestle him, but Leatherface, being too heavy, easily overpowers Morgan, lifting him upwards onto a chandelier. Leatherface then picks up his chainsaw and slices up into Morgan's groin, killing him. Erin then runs out of the shack and escapes through the woods, while Leatherface trips and cuts his leg in the process of chasing her. Erin then makes her way to a slaughterhouse and hides inside of a locker. At this point, Leatherface is still pursuing her and opens the locker directly across from her, thinking she's in there, only to get struck with a meat cleaver chopping off his arm. Erin then runs outside and flags down a trucker, who she tries to convince to go away from the Hewitt's house, but he stops to find help at the eatery. At the eatery, Erin sees Luda May and watches as Sheriff Hoyt arrives and talks to the trucker. Erin also sees Henrietta watching over the kidnapped baby in a high care, but after the truck driver explains the situation, the whole family leaves the building, leaving Erin enough time to sneak the baby out of the eatery, while the rest are trying to find her, thinking she is still in the trucker's car. But while they are distracted, Erin quickly hotwires the sheriff's car before running him over repeatedly until he is dead. Leatherface then makes his one last appearance in the road, attempting to stop her, but Erin and the baby escape untouched. We're then shown police archives again, only this time we see who is assumed to be Leatherface grab one of the officers, as the narrators explains to us that the case today still remains open. And that's the end. Let me know what you think, and if you want to make videos like this, just click the TubeBuddy link in the description to help you out.